I'm Amber, and I'm 28 years old. My brother just called me a jobless loser in front of his entire work crew at his birthday party. The laughter that followed felt like knives cutting through every bit of dignity I'd fought to rebuild over the past 8 months. I stood there, drink in hand, watching these grown men slap their knees like he'd delivered the funniest joke they'd ever heard. "Don't pay attention to her," Jake continued, gesturing dismissively in my direction. "She's just our family's unemployed burden." More laughter. Someone actually wiped tears from their eyes. That's when his buddy Mike turned around and grinned at me. "Hey there, Jobless Joe." The nickname stuck instantly, spreading through the group like wildfire. I smiled, not because I found it amusing, but because they had no idea what was coming. You see, while they were busy making me the punchline of their little comedy show, I was mentally calculating how many investigation reports I'd need to finalize first thing Monday morning. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely humiliated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how I ended up at this disaster of a party in the first place. 8 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was working as a senior operations analyst at Peterson & Associates, a consulting firm that specialized in construction industry efficiency. I'd spent 3 years there, developing expertise in project management systems and operational oversight that made me valuable to companies looking to streamline their processes. Then budget cuts hit, and I found myself joining the unemployment line along with half my department. Jake found this hilarious, of course. "Maybe this is a sign you should try something more stable," he'd say during family dinners, completely ignoring the fact that consulting work had given me specialized knowledge about construction operations. "Some people just aren't cut out for the real world," he'd add with that smug grin he'd perfected since childhood. My parents would nod along, always taking his side because he was the responsible one with the steady paycheck and the house in the suburbs. What they didn't know was that my unstable consulting work had taught me more about construction operations than Jake had learned in his 4 years as a basic crew supervisor. The job search was brutal. Every rejection email felt personal. Every "we'll keep your resume on file" felt like a polite way of saying I wasn't good enough. Jake made sure to remind me of my failures regularly, usually with that smug grin he'd perfected since childhood. "Still sending out those resumes, sis?" he'd ask during family gatherings. But 4 weeks ago, everything changed. I got a call from Davidson Industries, one of the largest construction firms in the state. They'd been quietly investigating some operational inefficiencies and needed someone with my specific background in construction consulting and process analysis. The position was corporate compliance analyst, essentially an internal investigator role, perfect for someone with my particular skill set. The interview process at Davidson Industries was thorough and discreet. Instead of the usual panel of middle managers, I found myself meeting with Margaret Davidson herself and her head of internal affairs, Robert Chen. They'd been tracking some concerning patterns in their operations and needed someone with fresh eyes and specific expertise to investigate. "We've reviewed your work at Peterson & Associates," Margaret said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. "Your analysis of operational inefficiencies at construction firms caught our attention. You identified several cases of internal information leaks that cost companies significant revenue." Inside the folder were copies of reports I'd written about corporate espionage and competitive intelligence theft. "We're dealing with similar issues here," Robert Chen added. "Project costs running over budget, clients mysteriously switching to competitors after initial consultations, information appearing in competitor proposals that suggests internal leaks." The position was essentially corporate detective work, investigating potential employee misconduct and information security breaches. The salary was excellent, but the job came with strict confidentiality requirements. I'd be working directly with executive leadership, reporting to Margaret Davidson herself, with an office in the corporate investigation wing rather than general operations. Most employees wouldn't even know my position existed, let alone what I was investigating. I accepted immediately, partly because of the incredible opportunity, but mostly because I could finally prove Jake wrong about my capabilities. For years, he'd treated me like someone who couldn't handle real work. Now I'd be investigating the kind of corporate problems that could destroy companies if left unchecked. My first day was deliberately low-key. I was introduced to other employees as a consulting analyst working on special projects for executive management. My office was on the 5th floor in the administrative wing, far from Jake's department on the ground floor. The building was large enough that avoiding him would be easy, especially since our work schedules and responsibilities didn't overlap. Robert Chen briefed me on their preliminary findings. We've identified unusual patterns in several areas, he explained, showing me charts and financial reports. Client information is being accessed outside normal business hours. Project costs are consistently exceeding estimates, and competitor firms seem to know details about our proposals before we submit them. 3 weeks passed as I learned the company's systems and began identifying specific areas of concern. Jake's name appeared in several reports, usually connected to projects that had experienced problems. His access logs showed he'd been downloading client information after hours, and his recent projects had shown unusual cost overruns that benefited specific subcontractors. I said nothing at family dinners, even when Jake launched into his usual speeches about company loyalty and how consulting work couldn't compare to real hands-on experience. I stayed quiet when he insisted that people like me would never understand how construction really worked. Inside, I was documenting patterns that suggested he understood it well enough to exploit it for personal gain. Tonight was supposed to be my chance to share some good news about finally finding stable employment. I'd planned to mention my new job without getting into specifics about what I was investigating. We'd celebrate together, and maybe Jake would stop treating me like a failure. Instead, I got jobless Joe and a room full of strangers laughing at my expense. But their laughter would be short-lived once they learned what I'd discovered about their own activities. The party was in full swing when I finally composed myself enough to rejoin the festivities. Jake had moved on to telling stories about his latest project, something about a challenging renovation, where his expertise had supposedly saved the day. His friends hung on every word, the same people who'd just been making jokes about my unemployment status. I grabbed another drink and positioned myself near the kitchen, close enough to hear conversations but far enough away to avoid becoming the center of attention again. That's when I overheard something that made my blood run cold. These weren't just crude jokes about my job situation. They were casual confessions of corporate espionage. "Remember that Henderson account?" Mike was saying to another guy I didn't recognize. "Easiest $3,000 I ever made." The stranger laughed and raised his beer. "Davidson's loss is Morrison Construction's gain, right?" Mike nodded enthusiastically. "Henderson was happy to switch firms when we explained the benefits of working with Morrison instead." "How many accounts have you guys flipped this year?" the stranger asked. Mike started counting on his fingers. "Henderson, the Miller Plaza project, those 2 residential developments on 5th Street. We're working on the Riverside Shopping Center deal now. Morrison pays better finder's fees than our own company pays in bonuses." My hands started shaking as I realized what I was hearing. These men weren't just complaining about work or making innocent jokes. They were discussing active betrayal of their employer, sharing confidential client information with competitors for personal profit. And Jake was right in the middle of it. "The beauty is that Davidson's management focuses on big-picture stuff," Jake said, joining the conversation with the same smugness he'd used to mock me earlier. "They don't pay attention to individual client relationships. They think competition is normal market forces. They have no idea we're feeding information directly to Morrison." I felt physically sick. My brother, my own brother, was casually admitting to corporate espionage and client theft. These weren't just lazy employees making honest mistakes. They were actively sabotaging the company that employed them, the same company that had hired me specifically to investigate exactly these kinds of problems. "What about Davidson's new efficiency initiatives?" the stranger asked. "Won't that create more oversight?" Mike shrugged dismissively. "More bureaucracy means more confusion. Easier to hide in the chaos. Besides, who's going to catch us? Some analyst from the corporate office who's never spent a day on an actual construction site?" The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. While they were mocking corporate oversight, they were confessing their crimes to exactly the kind of analysts they thought couldn't touch them. Jake even raised his beer in a mock toast. "To job security," he announced. "Morrison Construction appreciates loyal employees, even if they're technically employed elsewhere." I excused myself from the party shortly after, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely fabricated. Jake barely looked up from his conversation as I gathered my purse and coat. "Feel better, jobless Joe?" Mike called out cheerfully, completely oblivious to what he'd just revealed to Davidson Industries' newest corporate investigator. The drive home gave me time to process the full implications of what I'd witnessed. These men weren't just mocking my unemployment, they were stealing from the company that had placed enormous trust in my investigative capabilities. They were betraying client confidentiality and apparently profiting from their deception. I spent the rest of the weekend in my apartment staring at Davidson Industries' case files and organizational charts spread across my coffee table. The weight of what I'd discovered sat heavy in my chest. Jake wasn't just my irritating older brother anymore. He was a central figure in the exact corporate espionage ring I'd been hired to investigate. Sunday morning brought clarity along with my coffee. This wasn't about personal feelings or family dynamics. I had been hired to identify and stop corporate information theft, and I'd stumbled onto exactly what Davidson Industries suspected was happening. Robert Chen had been right about internal leaks, and now I had direct evidence of how they were occurring. I began documenting everything I could remember from the party conversation: names, projects mentioned, timeline references, and specific claims about Morrison construction payments. Mike, the stranger whose name I still needed to identify, Jake, and at least 2 other men whose faces I could describe even if I hadn't caught their names during the party chaos. The irony was almost poetic. Jake had spent months telling me I wasn't cut out for real work, that consulting and analysis were meaningless compared to hands-on construction experience. Now I was about to demonstrate exactly how corporate investigation worked, using skills he'd dismissed as irrelevant to uncover crimes he'd committed with casual arrogance. Monday couldn't come fast enough. I arrived at Davidson Industries an hour early, partly from anxiety and partly from determination. My office felt different now, less like a new opportunity and more like a command center. I had real corporate crimes to investigate, not just theoretical efficiency problems. My first call was to Robert Chen. As head of internal affairs, he had authority to authorize expanded investigation protocols and access to employee communications. I have significant developments in the information security case, I told him. I need to schedule an urgent briefing with you and Margaret Davidson. How significant? Robert asked. Confirmed corporate espionage with multiple employees involved, I replied. I have direct evidence of client information theft and coordination with Morrison Construction. Robert's sharp intake of breath confirmed that Morrison Construction had been on their radar as a potential recipient of stolen information. Can you be ready to present findings by end of business today? He asked. I assured him that I could, grateful that Davidson Industries took corporate security seriously enough to act quickly on credible evidence. Margaret will want a complete briefing, Robert warned. Make sure your documentation is thorough. I spent Monday organizing evidence and preparing for the most important presentation of my career. The conversation I'd overheard provided crucial confirmation of Davidson Industries' suspicions, but I needed to connect it to the patterns Robert had already identified: client access logs, project timelines, and financial irregularities that suddenly made perfect sense. By afternoon, I had a comprehensive case ready for executive review. Jake and his associates had been systematically stealing client information for at least 6 months, sharing project details with Morrison Construction, and receiving payments that explained their recent lifestyle improvements. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, especially combined with my direct witnessing of their admissions. Tuesday would bring the confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Corporate espionage was serious enough to warrant immediate termination and potential criminal prosecution. Jake's casual arrogance about exploiting Davidson Industries was about to meet professional accountability. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done. My meeting with Margaret Davidson and Robert Chen was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I'd spent Monday evening rehearsing my presentation until every detail was perfect. This wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. It was about protecting Davidson Industries from systematic corporate theft. Margaret's office was exactly what I'd expected from a successful CEO: professional, organized, and focused on results rather than appearances. Robert Chen was already present when I arrived, along with Jennifer Walsh from Legal Affairs. This wasn't just an investigative briefing. It was a strategy session for potential prosecution. Amber, Margaret said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Robert mentioned you have significant findings in our information security investigation. Walk us through what you've discovered. Her directness was one of the qualities I most respected about her leadership style. No small talk, just a focus on solving problems efficiently. I presented the evidence methodically, starting with the patterns Robert had identified and working through how my weekend discovery confirmed their worst suspicions. Margaret's expression grew increasingly grim as I detailed the scope of the client information theft, the coordination with Morrison Construction, and the apparent duration of the conspiracy. How confident are you in this intelligence? Jennifer asked, making notes on a legal pad. The overheard conversation provides strong evidence, but we'll need additional documentation for prosecution. I explained that the conversation confirmed patterns already present in access logs and project records, creating a comprehensive case. One of the primary suspects is your brother, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. She'd obviously reviewed the employee lists and noticed the shared surname. Yes, I confirmed. Jake Fletcher, crew supervisor in Project Management Division. Based on what I overheard, he appears to be coordinating information sharing with Morrison Construction. Margaret studied my face carefully, perhaps assessing whether family loyalty would compromise my professional judgment. What do you recommend? She asked. I took a deep breath before responding. Immediate suspension pending investigation for all identified employees. coordinated surveillance to gather additional evidence, and expanded audit of client account security. We'll need to move carefully, Robert added. If they suspect they're under investigation, they could destroy evidence or warn Morrison Construction. Jennifer nodded in agreement. Corporate espionage cases require thorough documentation. We'll need at least 2 weeks to build prosecutable cases. Margaret stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city while considering the implications. This explains several client defections we couldn't understand, she said. Morrison Construction has been winning contracts with suspiciously detailed proposals. Now we know how they're getting our information. I'll authorize expanded investigation protocols, Margaret decided. Robert, coordinate with IT security to monitor communications and access patterns. Jennifer, prepare legal documentation for potential prosecution. Amber, continue gathering intelligence while maintaining complete confidentiality about the investigation. The next 2 weeks would be crucial for building cases that would hold up in court. Corporate espionage was serious enough to warrant criminal prosecution, but only if we could prove systematic theft beyond reasonable doubt. Jake's casual admissions at his birthday party were just the beginning of what promised to be a complex investigation. One more thing, Margaret said as I prepared to leave. I know this situation involves your family, which makes it personally difficult. But your professionalism in handling this discovery is exactly why Davidson Industries hired you. That takes integrity that not everyone possesses. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of covert investigation and careful documentation. Robert Chen coordinated with IT security to monitor communications, while I continued gathering evidence through careful observation and analysis of access patterns. The picture that emerged was even worse than we'd initially suspected. Jake and his associates had been systematically stealing client information for over 6 months, sharing project details with Morrison Construction in exchange for finder's fees that averaged $3,000 per successful account transfer. The financial trail was clear once we knew what to look for: unusual bank deposits, lifestyle improvements that exceeded their salaries, and coordination between client defections and Morrison Construction contract wins. They're not just sharing information, Robert explained during one of our daily briefings. They're actively recruiting clients to switch firms. Morrison Construction essentially has sales agents working inside Davidson Industries, and they're paying them well for their services. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking in its systematic nature. Jennifer Walsh had been building legal cases that would support both termination and criminal prosecution. Corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy, she listed during our strategy session. The financial damage to Davidson Industries exceeds $50,000, which elevates this to felony level. Margaret Davidson received daily updates on our progress, occasionally requesting specific details about client impacts or financial implications. The Henderson account alone was worth $200,000 in potential revenue, she noted during one briefing. If they've been doing this systematically, we're looking at substantial damages. My own role in the investigation remained completely confidential. To other employees, I was still just a consulting analyst working on special projects. Jake continued his normal routine, completely unaware that his casual party conversation had triggered a comprehensive corporate investigation. The irony of him calling me Jobless Joe while I was documenting his criminal activities was not lost on me. Friday afternoon brought the final strategy meeting before we moved to the termination phase. We have enough evidence to support immediate dismissal and criminal referral, Jennifer confirmed. Financial records, access logs, communication patterns, and witness testimony create a comprehensive case. What about Morrison Construction? I asked. Are they facing any consequences for receiving stolen information? Robert nodded grimly. That's beyond our immediate scope, but law enforcement will investigate their role once we provide our findings. Corporate espionage works both ways. They're as guilty as our employees. Margaret made the final decision about timing. Monday morning, we terminate all identified employees simultaneously. Security will escort them from the building. IT will immediately revoke all access, and legal will handle criminal referrals. This ends next week. The matter-of-fact way she discussed destroying my brother's career was sobering, but I understood that corporate crime demanded corporate consequences. Amber, Margaret said as the meeting concluded, I want you to handle your brother's termination personally. This investigation started with your intelligence gathering, and your professionalism throughout this process has been exemplary. You should see it through to completion. The prospect of personally firing Jake was both terrifying and satisfying. The man who had humiliated me in front of his friends, who had dismissed my career as meaningless consulting work, would learn about accountability from his unemployed little sister. Justice had a sense of irony that even I hadn't anticipated. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes from absolute certainty about what needs to be done. I walked into Davidson Industries at 7:30 a.m., 90 minutes before my first scheduled termination meeting. Security had already coordinated weekend preparations, system access disabled, parking passes revoked, and conference rooms prepared for what would be Davidson Industries' most significant internal affairs action in years. Mike was first on my list. Scheduled for 9 a.m. in Conference Room B, Robert Chen would be present for all terminations, along with Jennifer Walsh and a security escort. At exactly 9 a.m., Mike knocked on the conference room door, looking puzzled about the unusual meeting request from corporate consulting. "Mike, please have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down with the casual confidence of someone who assumed this was routine administrative business. "This meeting is about your secondary employment arrangements with Morrison Construction," I continued, watching his expression shift from confusion to panic in the span of 3 seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his face had already given him away. Jennifer slid a folder across the table containing printed financial records, access logs, and correspondence analysis. "These documents tell a different story," I replied calmly. "Your employment with Davidson Industries is terminated immediately for violation of confidentiality agreements and theft of proprietary information." Mike's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can't prove anything," he finally managed. "Actually, we can," Robert interjected, producing documented evidence of his communications with Morrison Construction representatives. "Corporate espionage is a serious crime, Mike. Law enforcement will be notified today." The next 2 terminations followed the same pattern: confusion, denial, presentation of evidence, and ultimate acceptance of consequences. By noon, I had terminated 3 employees with the same swift efficiency that Margaret Davidson expected from all corporate decisions. Word was spreading through the company that something serious was happening, but nobody understood the full scope yet. My afternoon appointment was different, though. At 2 p.m., I would be sitting across from my own brother, delivering career-ending news to the man who had called me Jobless Joe just 2 weeks earlier. The symmetry was almost poetic, if poetry could capture the complexity of family loyalty versus professional responsibility. Jake arrived at Conference Room B precisely on time, still wearing his usual cocky grin. "What's this about?" he asked, settling into his chair like he owned the place. "Some consulting thing you need my input on?" The casual arrogance in his voice made what I had to do slightly easier. "This is about your relationship with Morrison Construction," I said, using the same direct approach that had worked all morning. Jake's grin faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "I don't have any relationship with Morrison," he said. "They're our competitors. Why would I have anything to do with them?" Jennifer placed the evidence folder in front of him, and I watched my brother's face change as he processed what he was seeing. Bank deposits, email communications, access logs. 2 weeks of investigation had created an overwhelming case against him. The man who had dismissed corporate analysis as meaningless office work was about to learn exactly how thorough corporate investigators could be. The moment Jake understood what was happening was deeply satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. "You set me up," he accused, his voice rising with each word. "You knew about Morrison, and you deliberately let me incriminate myself at the party." Robert Chen leaned forward slightly. "Actually, Jake, you incriminated yourself. Your sister just happened to overhear you confessing to corporate crimes." "Jake Fletcher, your employment is terminated immediately," Jennifer announced, reading from the official termination letter. "You're required to surrender your company identification, access cards, and any materials belonging to Davidson Industries. Security will escort you to your workstation to collect personal items under supervision." "This is insane," Jake protested, standing abruptly from his chair. "You can't fire me based on some misunderstanding. I've been with this company for 4 years. I have seniority. I have performance reviews. I have rights." His desperation was almost pitiful, but I felt no sympathy. This was the same man who had humiliated me in front of strangers just 2 weeks ago. "Your rights ended when you decided to steal client information," I replied calmly. "Law enforcement will contact you this week about potential criminal charges. I suggest you retain legal counsel immediately." The mention of criminal prosecution seemed to break something inside him. He sank back into his chair, staring at the evidence documents. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About Morrison? About the investigation? About everything?" I considered the question carefully, recognizing that my answer would define our relationship going forward. "I've been investigating corporate espionage at Davidson Industries for 3 weeks," I said. "But I only discovered your involvement at your birthday party." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of us. While Jake was calling me Jobless Joe, he was confessing to crimes that I had been specifically hired to investigate. His mockery of my consulting background had revealed the exact corporate theft that my consulting expertise was designed to detect and stop. Security arrived to escort Jake to his workstation for supervised collection of personal items. As he stood to leave, he turned back to me with an expression that mixed hatred with grudging respect. "This isn't over," he said. "Family is family, and Mom and Dad are going to hear about this." I met his gaze without flinching. "I'm sure they will," I agreed. "And they'll hear the whole truth." After Jake left, Robert and Jennifer remained to discuss investigation conclusions and next steps. "That was professionally handled," Jennifer said. "Terminating family members requires maintaining appropriate boundaries, and you handled it perfectly." Robert nodded in agreement. "The documentation we've gathered should support criminal prosecution if law enforcement decides to pursue charges." The rest of Monday passed quietly, with occasional curious questions from other employees about the unusual security activity. Some people knew Jake was my brother, which added complexity to the situation, but I maintained professional discretion about investigation details. Corporate espionage cases required confidentiality, even after terminations were complete. By Tuesday morning, my phone was buzzing with family calls and texts. Jake had apparently spent Monday evening crafting his own narrative about corporate conspiracies and sibling rivalry, conveniently omitting the minor details about systematic theft and client betrayal. My parents' messages ranged from concerned to accusatory, demanding explanations for my attack on my brother's career. "We need to talk," my mother's voicemail said. "I don't know what kind of power trip you're on, but destroying your brother's livelihood is completely unacceptable. Family loyalty means something in this world." The irony of her lecture about loyalty wasn't lost on me, considering Jake's betrayal of his employer and clients. Wednesday evening brought the family confrontation I'd been expecting. My parents arrived at my apartment unannounced, with Jake trailing behind them like a wounded puppy seeking sympathy and support. The moment I opened the door, my mother launched into a speech about family loyalty and sibling responsibility that would have been more impressive if it weren't so hypocritical. "How could you do this to your own brother?" she demanded, pushing past me into my living room. "Jake is devastated. He's lost his job, his reputation, his future, all because of some corporate politics you got caught up in." My father nodded grimly behind her, clearly viewing this as another example of his daughter's questionable judgment. Jake stood by my window, staring out at the city with theatrical despair that might have been convincing if I didn't know exactly what he'd done. "She destroyed my career," he said, without turning around. 4 years of hard work, gone, because she wanted to play corporate investigator and settle some imaginary score. "Let me explain what actually happened," I said. But my mother cut me off immediately. "We know what happened," she snapped. "Jake told us everything. You used your new position to target him out of spite for some joke at a party. This is vindictive and petty, even for you." I walked to my kitchen table and picked up a copy of the Davidson Industries Internal Investigation Report, which detailed the full scope of Jake's corporate espionage activities. "Jake, tell them about Morrison Construction," I said calmly. "Tell them about the client information you stole. Tell them about the payments you received for betraying your employer." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around or respond to my challenge. My parents looked confused, glancing between us like they were missing crucial information about the situation. "What is she talking about?" my father asked Jake directly. "What's this about Morrison Construction and payments?" "It's complicated," Jake mumbled, still facing the window. "The construction industry is competitive. Sometimes you have to make strategic choices to protect your career prospects." Even now, faced with his own family, he couldn't bring himself to admit the truth about his systematic theft and betrayal. "Strategic choices," I repeated. "Is that what you call stealing confidential client information and selling it to competitors for personal profit?" My mother's face went pale as the implications began to sink in. "That's not what happened," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Jake would never do anything illegal or unethical." I showed them the investigation documentation. Bank records, communication logs, access patterns, and client information that Jake had stolen and sold to Morrison Construction. Page by page, document by document, I walked them through the case that had cost Jake his career and would likely result in criminal prosecution. My parents sat in stunned silence, occasionally glancing at Jake for denials that never came. The reality of systematic corporate espionage was difficult to reconcile with their image of their responsible, hardworking son. "Why didn't you come to us?" my father finally asked Jake. "If you were having financial problems, if you needed help, why didn't you ask your family?" "I didn't need help," Jake said, finally turning to face us with defiant anger. "I was making extra money on consulting arrangements. It's not like I was hurting Davidson Industries intentionally. They're a huge company. They can afford to lose a few clients to normal market competition." The casual dismissal of his crimes was breathtaking in its arrogance and complete lack of understanding about corporate responsibility. Normal market competition, I repeated. You stole confidential information, violated employment agreements, and committed corporate espionage. Jake, you're facing potential criminal charges for what you did. The days following my family confrontation brought unexpected developments that changed the entire scope of the Davidson Industries investigation. Robert Chen called Thursday morning with news that expanded the case far beyond what any of us had anticipated. Morrison Construction wants to cooperate, he said. Their legal counsel contacted us yesterday with some interesting information. Margaret Davidson cleared her morning schedule for an emergency briefing with Robert, Jennifer Walsh, and myself. Morrison Construction's legal team had apparently been conducting their own internal investigation after noticing suspicious patterns in their recent contract acquisitions. What they'd discovered would transform our employee misconduct case into something much more significant. Morrison Construction's executives had no knowledge of the information theft, Jennifer explained, presenting documents their legal team had provided. Their project managers were receiving anonymous tips about Davidson Industries' client preferences, budget limitations, and proposal strategies. They assumed it was normal industry intelligence gathering. Robert continued the briefing with financial analysis that revealed the true scope of the problem. The payments Jake and his associates received weren't coming from Morrison Construction's official accounts. They were being funded through a third-party consulting firm called Strategic Advantage Solutions, which appears to be facilitating similar arrangements with multiple construction companies. Margaret leaned forward, clearly understanding the implications immediately. Industrial espionage ring, she said. This isn't just about our employees selling information to one competitor. This is systematic intelligence gathering across the entire construction industry. The scope of what we'd uncovered was far more serious than simple employee misconduct. Strategic Advantage Solutions has been recruiting employees from at least 6 major construction firms, Robert explained, showing organizational charts and financial flows that painted a picture of coordinated corporate espionage. They identify key employees with access to sensitive information, offer them consulting arrangements, and then sell that intelligence to multiple competing firms. The realization that Jake had been a pawn in a larger criminal conspiracy was both relieving and disturbing. Relieving because it meant his betrayal wasn't entirely personal calculation. Disturbing because it revealed how vulnerable construction companies were to systematic intelligence theft. Davidson Industries had been just one target in a much broader criminal enterprise. "What's our next step?" Margaret asked. Jennifer consulted her legal notes before responding. Law enforcement needs to be notified immediately. This level of organized commercial espionage falls under federal jurisdiction. We're looking at RICO violations, conspiracy charges, and potentially interstate commerce crimes. Morrison Construction is cooperating fully, Robert added. They're providing financial records, communication logs, and client information that should help law enforcement identify the full scope of Strategic Advantage Solutions operations. Their cooperation would be crucial for building cases against the actual organizers rather than just the recruited employees. Margaret authorized full cooperation with federal investigation while maintaining operational security for Davidson Industries. We protect our remaining clients, assist law enforcement, and make sure this kind of infiltration can't happen again, she decided. Amber, your work on this case has been exemplary. You identified a problem that could have destroyed this company. The recognition was gratifying, but the implications of what we'd discovered were sobering. Jake's casual conversation at his birthday party had revealed a criminal conspiracy that threatened the entire construction industry. What had started as family humiliation had become a federal case that would likely result in multiple prosecutions and industry-wide security changes. "There's one more thing," Robert said as the meeting concluded. "Strategic Advantage Solutions has been monitoring our investigation. They know we've identified their operation here, and they know you were instrumental in uncovering their network. We're recommending enhanced security measures for your protection until arrests are made." The possibility that I might be in danger because of my professional responsibilities was sobering, but it confirmed that we'd uncovered something truly significant. Jake's mockery of my consulting background had led to dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been systematically damaging construction companies nationwide. 2 weeks later, federal agents executed coordinated arrests across 6 states, dismantling the Strategic Advantage Solutions network that had been facilitating industrial espionage throughout the construction industry. Jake's cooperation with the investigation had been instrumental in identifying key figures and understanding recruitment methods, earning him consideration for reduced charges. The media coverage was extensive, with Davidson Industries prominently featured as the company whose internal investigation had unraveled the entire conspiracy. Margaret Davidson handled press conferences with her usual professionalism, emphasizing the importance of corporate security and ethical business practices in protecting industry integrity. Our corporate compliance analyst, Amber Fletcher, deserves particular recognition, Margaret told reporters during the main press conference. Her professional dedication and investigative expertise led to discovering this criminal network. She exemplifies the kind of ethical leadership that makes Davidson Industries a trusted partner for our clients and competitors alike. The public recognition was gratifying, but it also brought unexpected challenges. Jake's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a victim of sophisticated criminal manipulation, suggesting that family dynamics had influenced my investigation. The strategy failed when prosecutors presented evidence of Jake's voluntary participation and financial benefit from the conspiracy. My parents attended Jake's sentencing hearing, along with several other family members who had gradually come to understand the seriousness of what had occurred. Federal Judge Rebecca Chen showed measured consideration for Jake's cooperation while emphasizing the severity of commercial espionage and its impact on legitimate business competition. Mr. Fletcher, you voluntarily chose to steal confidential information from your employer, Judge Chen stated during sentencing. Your cooperation with law enforcement has been valuable in dismantling a criminal conspiracy, but it cannot eliminate the consequences of your initial choices to betray professional responsibilities and participate in organized crime. Jake received 12 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. His cooperation with the investigation had significantly reduced what could have been a 3-year sentence, but it couldn't eliminate the consequences of his participation in systematic corporate espionage. As he was led away, he looked at me with an expression that seemed to combine regret with grudging understanding. My parents approached me after the sentencing, my mother tearful but seeming to grasp the broader implications of what had occurred. "We owe you an apology," my father said quietly. "We didn't understand what Jake had really done. We thought you were being vindictive, but you were protecting people and companies from systematic criminal activity." "I was doing my job," I replied simply. "And my job required me to report corporate crimes, regardless of who was involved." My mother nodded through her tears. "I keep thinking about all the companies that were hurt," she said. "All the people who lost jobs because clients were stolen through illegal methods." It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged the broader implications of Jake's participation in the criminal conspiracy. For months, they'd focused on how his arrest would affect our family's reputation. Now they were beginning to understand that his actions had contributed to systematic damage across the construction industry. The Strategic Advantage Solutions prosecutions continued for several more months, with federal investigators securing convictions against the criminal network's organizers and financial facilitators. Jake's information proved valuable in understanding recruitment methods and identifying other compromised employees at construction companies nationwide. Margaret Davidson promoted me to senior corporate compliance analyst, with expanded responsibilities for industry security coordination and federal cooperation. "You've proven that ethical leadership can coexist with business success," she told me during the promotion announcement. "That combination is exactly what Davidson Industries needs as we continue growing." 1 year later, I stood in my new home office, reviewing the final report on the Strategic Advantage Solutions prosecutions. The federal task force had successfully dismantled the criminal network, secured convictions against key organizers, and implemented industry-wide security protocols that would prevent similar conspiracies from developing in the future. Jake was released after serving 10 months of his 12-month sentence, having earned early release through continued cooperation with federal investigators and exemplary behavior during incarceration. His supervised probation included community service with organizations focused on corporate ethics and employment law education for construction workers. "I never understood what I was really involved in," he said during one of our carefully structured family meetings. "I thought I was just making some extra money through consulting arrangements. I didn't realize I was participating in organized crime that was hurting entire companies and their employees." Our relationship remained complicated, but we were slowly rebuilding some level of trust and communication. Family therapy sessions had helped both of us understand how professional responsibilities and personal relationships could conflict, and how integrity sometimes required difficult choices that affected people we cared about. "I was wrong to humiliate you at the party," Jake continued, "and I was wrong about consulting work being meaningless. Your expertise is exactly what caught me and stopped a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed multiple companies." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I'd received from him. My parents had gradually accepted that I had acted correctly in reporting Jake's crimes, and that corporate compliance required enforcing ethical standards regardless of family relationships. My mother even attended the industry recognition ceremony where I received an award for corporate security leadership from the Construction Industry Ethics Board. "I'm proud of you," she said afterward. Words I'd waited years to hear in a context that wasn't conditional on family loyalty or personal sacrifice. You did what was right, even when it was difficult. And you protected people who didn't even know they needed protection. Davidson Industries continued to grow and prosper, with several major contract acquisitions that Margaret attributed directly to our reputation for ethical business practices and information security. Clients trust us because they know we protect confidential information and maintain professional standards, she explained during our annual performance review. The professional recognition extended beyond Davidson Industries. I was invited to speak at construction industry conferences about corporate security and ethical leadership, and to consult with companies implementing enhanced compliance protocols. The consulting work that Jake had once dismissed as meaningless had become my area of recognized expertise. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that I could handle extreme professional pressure while maintaining ethical principles and family relationships. The woman who had been mocked as Jobless Joe at a birthday party had evolved into someone who could investigate organized crime and protect corporate integrity under the most challenging circumstances. On the anniversary of Jake's birthday party, I received a letter from Mike, one of the other employees who had been prosecuted in the Strategic Advantage Solutions case. "Prison gave me time to understand what we were really doing," he wrote. "We weren't just making extra money, we were stealing from companies and hurting legitimate competition. You were right to stop us." The letter was unexpected, but meaningful confirmation that my decision to prioritize professional ethics over family loyalty had protected people and companies from systematic criminal damage. Sometimes doing the right thing requires courage you don't know you possess until circumstances demand it from you. Standing in my home office, surrounded by professional recognition I'd never imagined receiving, I reflected on the journey from unemployment and family humiliation to corporate leadership and federal cooperation. The path had been painful and complicated, but it had led me to discover integrity and strength I didn't know I possessed. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life lessons about choosing professional integrity over personal comfort. Remember that family loyalty should never require enabling criminal behavior or compromising ethical standards that protect innocent people.